state projects and the ability of Taiwanese NGOs to do effective work overseas from a multi-stakeholder perspective. And on this panel, we'll be able to hear lots more about other countries' experiences in this area, and hopefully have some interesting feedback and encouragement for Taiwan to go for the next level. And we have a very distinguished panel, and we're very excited that we have a panel made up entirely, except for myself, of career diplomats who have long experience working for their country's foreign ministries and for the European Union, in the case of Mr. Hachez, who I hope is still online with us. And in how other countries' governments work together with civil society to promote all these goals that we're trying to promote for humanity, and working on this kind of partnership. So I'll just briefly mention the list of our great speakers. I think hopefully you have the book in front of you, and in just the order that they are printed on it, and also in the order they are seating. We have Mr. Michael Gugan, the Deputy Representative from Australian office in Taipei, and I can also one day belated congratulations on your 40th anniversary celebration. That was very nice. Milestone, historic milestone for the Australian office in Japan. And next to our life, we have Yokochi Akira, also Deputy Representative of the Japan-Taiwan Exchange Association. And just, by the way, thank you for the most recent donation of vaccines. Yeah, I very Japan has been a strong friend for this last year. Yeah, and going across to the other side of the room, Mr. Guillaume Delvallee, from the Deputy Director of the Bureau Français in Taipei, the French Representative Office. And joining us online, I hope he's there, Mr. Hachez, are you there? Daniel
Yes, I am.
is the head of cooperation of the European Union and has many years of experience with working on the European Union's external cooperation tracks. And as I think everybody knows, the European Union is itself a major international donor. So welcome, Mr. Hachez. And finally, last but not least, after we go around the world hearing from these other major countries' experiences and the European Union, we will come back to Taiwan with our very own Ambassador Rong Shen-Wu, who is now a senior advisor to the Institute for National Policy Research, which is a co-organizer of this event, but had been, as you know, ambassador and career diplomat in Taiwan, and also exactly on this topic had been for a number of years the head of the NGO Affairs Committee at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, so directly working on this topic. So hopefully he can share his experience as well and reflect on everybody else's. Now let's go right ahead into the presentation, and we've given everyone, we started a few minutes late, but we're going to end a few minutes late also. So everybody can still take up to the originally allotted 15 minutes time. And so we start with Australia. Yeah, Mr. Gugan, take the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I will start my timer so that I don't take I know that time is tight, and it's tough being the last session in the afternoon. So thank you for sticking around and continuing to listen to us. So yes, today I wanted to talk a little bit about, to follow on from a conversation I actually had with you, Jay, earlier this year with Taiwan Aid about the way that Australia and our development program Sure. Okay, this makes me feel much taller. Okay. So yes, very happy to be here and talk with you today. Yes, as I mentioned, I had a conversation with Jay earlier this year, talking about how Australia and my department in particular, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, manages its relationship with civil society and non-government organizations. So I'll get into a little bit of detail about the mechanisms that we use to consult with civil society for Australia's development program. I think you have my bio in the book in front of you, but yes, I have served in Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, our foreign ministry, for almost 15 years now, and previously was posted at our office in Canada. I have been here in Taipei since, been in this role since August 2020, so a little over a year. So first off, Australia's development program is approximately 4 billion Australian dollars per year that we spend, which is about 80 billion Taipei. And a lot of that money that we spend every year, we spend in partnership with civil society and with NGOs. Why do we do that? We do that because we know that NGOs and the NGO sector have a good understanding of how to deliver effective development assistance. First off, they have strong connections to local communities. And this is very important, particularly in a crisis where the NGOs that best that understand the local community can step in and provide a quick response when there is a typhoon or an earthquake or other similar natural or man-made disaster. NGOs have different perspectives and expertise. We in government don't understand everything perfectly, and we value the different perspective that NGOs bring to our development goals. And finally, our NGO partners are able to mobilize public support and contributions for development. So, for example, if there is a natural disaster overseas, it's not my government that will run campaigns to raise money. It's normally our NGO partners like Red Cross or others. So this is another area where NGOs bring a lot of strength to our development program. So I just wanted to run through quickly what are the principles we use when we're working together with NGOs, with civil society. The first principle is that we have open communication and dialogue. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in the following slides. We have number two, we have shared objectives. So we will work with NGOs overseas when our objectives align. Thirdly, we want to make sure that the NGOs we work with are effective. The NGOs that we work with need to demonstrate that they have the ability to achieve results. Fourth, we use a range of different funding mechanisms. Someone's left their phone behind. 没问题. So, effectiveness and diversity of funding arrangements. We know that for the NGO sector, having predictable funding is very important. And we in government strive to provide predictable funding where we can. Fifth, accountability for results. So we as government are accountable to the Australian people who vote for my boss, the Foreign Minister, and we are accountable to her, our Foreign Minister, and so we need to be accountable to the Australian public. So at the same time, we demand accountability from the NGOs that we work with. And then finally, our seventh principle is to strengthen local systems and ensure sustainability. So we want to work with those NGOs that are genuinely representative of their local communities. Or if we're working with Australian NGOs, we want to make sure that they are contributing to the strength of the communities that they're working in overseas. Okay, so this is, like I said earlier, I'll talk a little bit about how we, at my department, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, or DFAT, go about managing our relationship with civil society and NGOs. So what we have is a partnership in the form of an agreement, which I have a copy of here and is available online, with the Australian Council for International Development, or ACFID. And this organisation represents over 125 Australian development organisations and NGOs. And ACFID is therefore a key partner through this agreement that we have. It's a key partner for my department, DFAT, of working to work with our NGOs. Importantly, ACFID is entirely independent of government. The Australian government does provide about 1/3 of ACFID's funding, but we have no representation on their board and no say in their management or in their operations. It's also a very powerful organisation, and yes, my department has cooperation with them, but they also speak directly with my minister and other ministers in the Australian government. So our partnership is in the form of an MOU, or Memorandum of Understanding, which is a form of agreement. Our last one was signed in November 2019 and will run for 5 years. We've had a formal partnership since 2009, but we've had 50 years of engagement between DFAT and ACFID. And an important pillar of this relationship is that it's based on mutual respect and trust. So what are the objectives of this partnership that we have with ACFID? It's to enhance policy and practice dialogue between DFAT and the NGO sector, to exchange knowledge and ideas to increase development effectiveness, and to increase the capability, effectiveness, and accountability of the Australian NGO development sector. And then we go on to talk a little bit about kind of the guiding principles of our partnership. So to start with, it is the idea that we both come to this partnership with different goals in mind. We are there, we need respect for DFAT as a government agency and our goals to deliver our development program on behalf of the Australian people. And at the same time, we respect that ACFID is an independent civil society organisation with the goal of improving development outcomes for people overseas. We acknowledge that what we want to achieve through this partnership is to make sure that we have development outcomes that are better than either DFAT could do alone or that ACFID could do alone. That coming together and exchanging our views and experience ensures that both of us come out the other side as a better organisation. And we have a commitment to sharing ideas and lessons learnt. As I said earlier, we acknowledge that the expertise that we bring is different. So as you can see here, what my department brings is an understanding of Australian government policy, an understanding of development issues in the context of Australia's foreign policy and our foreign policy objectives. We bring a deep knowledge of developing countries and development issues across the Indo-Pacific. And obviously we bring, as I mentioned earlier, a significant amount of funding to support the Australian NGO sector. ACFID, of course, brings an understanding and representation of the Australian civil society and NGO sector. They are able to bring together, through their 125 members, the views of the many, many different NGOs and organizations that work in the development sector, which is very important to DFAT, that we have a single voice that is able to represent all the different partners that we work with and can raise issues with us and speak on behalf of the sector as a whole. I should note, however, that we do acknowledge that not all NGO partners agree on everything all the time, just like government departments don't agree on everything all the time. So an important part, we have our ACFID partnership, which is our kind of lead level of coordination, but we do have the ability to consult individual NGOs on their programs. And of course we do when we've engaged specific NGOs for specific purposes. ACFID also has a code of conduct. So all of its members have to go through quite a serious process, a vetting process, to make sure that they meet ethical standards, financial standards, and this is very important to my department, to know that the NGOs that are represented by ACFID all meet a certain standard of conduct, because of course we want to make sure that our development program is being implemented in a very proper manner, and nothing untoward is happening. And of course they bring access to the NGO and academic expertise. So how does it actually work? Really, what we agree to is a series of consultations throughout the year. So the head of my department, which we call a secretary, she meets once a year with the ACFID board to talk about any kinds of issues that the NGO sector see with the Australian Development Program. Our secretary is able to outline what the Australian government vision is and what we're trying to achieve through our development program. And at the same time, ACFID can raise any concerns they have about specific projects or themes that we're pursuing, or suggest other areas that they think that Australia should prioritise. So that's kind of the most important meeting each year. And then we also have an annual meeting with our Deputy Secretary, kind of equivalent to your Deputy Minister, and then a range of meetings all the way down our organisation. And of course we have a whole team who are dedicated to managing our relationship with ACFID and with the NGO sector as a whole. So, you know, the importance of this is that it's not just my government handing over money. That's my timer. It's not just my government handing over money and saying, do this. We want it to be a partnership where we have genuine communication between the NGO sector and the government, so that we can improve and continue to improve the Australian Development Program overseas. And that's about it for me, and happy to take questions at the end. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gugan. That was a wonderfully fruitful presentation already in just a very few minutes. Got many interesting points. So, but we'll hold those points for later. Move on to our second speech, Yokochi-san.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Akira Yokochi, Deputy Representative of Taiwan Japan-Taiwan Association, office, Taipei office. I'm quite happy to be here today to join the wonderful discussion on the collaboration between ODA department with NGOs. I just found the same kind of similarity or system support that kind of collaboration here with a Japanese system. So maybe you also find the same kind of things. Please look at yes, my presentation is a bit shorter for making up of time also. Anyway, so please let's take a look at just a moment. My eye not so good. In the grass to anyway, before going into the details, briefly touching upon my experience to devoted to the ODA a little bit. I used to be involved to the ODA affairs, but mainly focusing on the international organization affairs like UNDP, World Bank, DAC, or like that. But before that, yes, I used to be joining the UN peacekeeping operation, so-called mission in Kosovo, UN mission in Kosovo from 1999 to 2000, just a half year as a civil affairs officer. At the time, I found so many collaboration between my UNHCR as well as international NGOs. So maybe better to touch upon this experience through the discussion or question and answer. And the Japanese system is also quite similar to the Australian one. Mainly, Ministry of Foreign Affairs also proactively collaborates with the NGO is obtaining the people's Japanese population's understanding and supports for the international cooperation, mainly for getting the fund. And for implementing the official development assistance, so-called ODA projects effectively. The partner between MOFA, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan, and the NGOs mainly focus on following three pillars. The first one is funding assistance for NGOs development cooperative cooperation activity. The second one, creation on an enabling environment, mainly categorized to the two parts, NGO consultant and NGO inter-program, which I will touch upon later. The third one is a dialogue, quite important, with NGOs regarding development cooperation policy and partners. And then, so let me touch upon more details of the first pillar of funding assistance for Japanese NGO. That part, a pillar, mainly is composed of two parts. First one, grant assistance for a Japanese NGO project. The second one, which I will later touch upon, namely emergency humanitarian assistance through the Japan platform. So first, let me touch upon the first part of the first pillar, namely grant assistance for Japanese NGO project. The scheme, grant assistance for a Japanese project, provides the government funds for economic and social development projects undertaken by Japanese NGOs in developing country and region. For this end, the organization, NGO, must be registered as a specialized non-profitable corporation, a public interest incorporated association or foundation, or a general incorporated association or foundation in Japan, and must have its headquarters in Japan. So stupid, I guess. But anyway, from fiscal policy, fiscal year 2002 to 2018, a total of approximately 44.7 billion yen. I don't have any good number, equal to Taipei. But anyway, in funding assistance was provided for 1,407 projects in 71 countries and one region, conducted by 169 organizations, NGOs. And then let me touch upon countries and regions where projects have been implemented, as well as the breakdown of sectors. This slide presents in fiscal year 2018, project size by region are firstly in East Asian, 40%, followed by Sub-Saharan Africa, 21%, South Asia, 70%, the Middle East and Africa, 13%, Latin America and the Caribbean, Oceania and Central Asia, and the Caucasus. The breakdown of sector not presenting here on this slide, but anyway, let me say, mainly education and human resources development at 32%, medical and public health 20%, agriculture and forestry 15%, and other including disaster prevention, demining, exploded ordnance clearance, peace building, and water, telecommunication, and transportation. Next, let me go into the second part of the funding assistance for Japanese NGO as the first pillar, namely emergency humanitarian assistance for the project Japan Platform. Japan Platform is very quite similar Australian ones, I guess. Is a consortium of the NGOs, a business community, and the government for responding to emergency humanitarian crises such as refugee crisis and natural disaster in a more effective and rapid manner than any one party could not do its own. From its establishment in 2000 to the end of 2011 and in 2018, totally 59 organizations have undertaken projects funded by the government of Japan in 52 countries and regions. This Japan Platform grasps people's needs to receive assistance based on international requirements on humanitarian aid. Since its foundation, the Japan Platform has implemented more than 1,000 government-funded programs. And also this platform has worked in such countries like Afghanistan, Pakistan, which had long been areas of conflict, South Sudan, Syria, Bangladesh. The services provided by Japan Platform include the distribution of relief supplies such as food, shelters, water, and sanitation program, healthcare, reconstruction of livelihoods, and educational and psychosocial support. From the foundation of the Japan Platform to fiscal year 2018, the government of Japan has contributed around 54 billion yen to JPF. Next, here, let me introduce the example of the Japan Platform's project. The first is a Syria case, the upper column presenting. From November 2012, JPF has provided assistance to internationally displaced person, IDP, in Syria, and refugees who had fled to the neighboring countries. And from June 2014, has continued assistance for IDPs in Iraq. JPF, Japan Platform, has provided food, water, and daily necessities to people living in devastated towns and for people living in refugee camps or host communities in various countries. And based on the situation, has provided well-customized assistance, such as child protection, livelihood support, and the creation of education environments. The second is the Indonesia case. As you know, earthquake struck on September 28, 2018, with a magnitude of 7.5 with epicenter in central Sulawesi, Indonesia. Each JPF member NGOs safely delivered water to protect lives, access to medical care, assistance for education centers and shelters, etc. And now provide temporary housing assistance and child protection. So let me touch upon second pillar for collaboration between MOFA and Japan, MOFA of Japan and NGOs, namely prevention on and enabling environment for NGOs. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs undertakes a variety of the projects aimed at further capacity building of Japanese NGOs. Aside from MOFA, JICA also offers various types of the training for the project professionals in the field of development. Here, let me touch upon the two of these collaboration, namely, first one is NGO consultants. The second one is NGO intern program. The first one is a Japanese NGO which have experience in and have had success with international cooperation appointed by a Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs to trustee organization of NGO consultants. Their role is to respond to the various inquiries from the public and from NGO stakeholders regarding NGO and international cooperation, including questions about the international cooperation activity of NGOs, and also establishment of NGO as an organizational management, operation, and employment with NGO, so many fields. But anyway, NGO consultants also visit other organizations, not only upon request, but also by their own initiative to hold classes and seminars taking international cooperation as a scheme. Mine? Okay. Few minutes, okay. 3 minutes, okay. But anyway, the second one, NGO intern program. Many Japanese NGO, either because financial consultants constraint and staffing shortage, do not have the capacity to train young workers. This program commissions Japanese NGO to accept and train younger people interested in the international organization or corporation in order to open up the door for NGO workers. So lastly, let me touch upon the third pillar of this cooperation, namely dialogue with NGO. To promote the stronger, yes, the first one is the NGO MOFA regular consultation meeting. To promote a stronger partnership and dialogue between NGO and MOFA, this meeting has launched in fiscal year 1996 as a forum for the exchanging opinion on regular basis of acquiring information, ODA, and measuring measures for improving partnership with NGO. And the second one is the NGO Embassy ODA consultant meeting. This meeting is mainly aimed at promoting the dialogue and stronger partnership with Japanese NGO working in and outside of Japan. The third one is the NGO JICA, Japan International Cooperation Agency, NGO JICA dialogue meeting. That namely mainly aims at promoting effective international cooperation through NGO JICA partnership and to increase the public understanding and participation in which NGOs and JICA work together as equal partners. Okay, lastly, let me touch upon briefly our agenda ahead for further improving our collaboration. In comparison with the NGOs in United States and Europe, possessing extensive experience and knowledge, underpinned by a long history as well as a solid organizational foundation. International operation activity of Japanese NGO still have the significant room for expansion, strengthening. Going forward, the Japanese NGO must further strengthen their partnership with local NGO in a developing country, and the partnership among Japanese NGO, and the partnership with the private sector. And secondly, second agenda ahead for us is establishing the sound fiscal management of the NGO, Japanese NGO. If NGO are to carry out independent activities that do not rely solely on governmental funding, it is essential that a Japanese NGO practice sound financial management, including ensuring improved capacity and accountability. So that's all for you today to understand our basic structure of the Japanese assistance in cooperation with NGOs. Thank you very much for listening.
Oh, thank you very much. Arigato. That was also very insightful and left us with questions at the end for future development. So we can, in a minute, we can talk to them. And now, if we may just quickly jump across to the other side of the continent, to Europe, and Monsieur Delvallee.
Hello to everybody. So I'm Guillaume Delvallee, Deputy Director at the French office here in Taipei. I'm particularly happy to be here today in front of such different types of expertises and different traditions, either in the organization of public services or in their own management of ODA. I'm also happy to be sitting in front of two of my almost stakeholders as a representative of the state, one of which is the European Union, who is following us from Bangkok. And I say, bonjour, Monsieur Hachez. Because we are redeemable and we are accountable to the European Union, just like they are to us, and also actually to one of the French NGOs who is in the room and who I'm particularly happy to be listening to whatever you have to criticize what I have to say. I hope you won't hesitate to do so at the end. France has taken which one is it, this one? There we go. France has taken, at the level of our president, a global commitment to increase its ODA to 0.55% in 2022, which is still insufficient, but is a first step on the way to the OECD goal of 0.7 in 2025. And within this ODA, the share of civil society organizations, the CSOs, has been traditionally low. I have to admit this, but I'll explain why. And that, what is interesting, which is what I will focus on today, is that it has been changing, at least in the 10 past years, in order to achieve more lasting, sustainable development through partnerships, and because of the verified added value of CSOs. Maybe at this point, before I go further, it is important to have a definition to say which CSOs I will be talking about. The French MOFA considers CSOs as encompassing NGOs, foundations, cooperative unions, professional organizations, social partners such as trade unions and the employer unions, as well as the non-profit economic actors, such as social companies. It does not encompass commercial companies and local governments, which are for us a different definition and counted differently in our ODA stats. But of course, within that definition, you can understand that you have a very great diversity, whether in size or of resources, whether human or financial, and of course within their expertise or their mandate, some being more specialized than others. Channeling, I said, a more significant part of ODA through CSOs is a new public commitment of the French authorities. And why is it a new commitment? Because probably, I believe we can say that it is a relatively new phenomenon. Many CSOs in France, the vast majority of which carry out solidarity actions on our national territory, were rather reluctant until recently to go further out into the international arena. Working abroad appeared for many of them to be either complicated in terms of languages or visas, whatever, difficult to justify to their donors, if not even outright dangerous. And governmental ODA, therefore, has traditionally challenged mostly through the promotion of bilateral technical expertise abroad. We have had for the longest of time a very strong expertise that comes even as far back as the time when we used to have colonies and a presence in a lot of territories around the world, and that have been trained to be able to provide the type of specific expertise that you need in different terrains than the French metropolis. And even today, we maintain a lot of those experts that are based directly either in organizations or even governments abroad around the world. Since 2000, we have had a rather new strong emphasis on multilateral channel for ODA, whether in the EU, I talked about it, and it will be probably developed further by Dr. Hachez, in the UN system, of course, including by giving less project-oriented support and more general support, and all of the multiple multilateral initiatives such as the Global Fund, Gavi, COVAX more recently, and everything. However, so that was more the tradition of the French ODA. This has been changing in the past 10 years for two main points, I believe, in 2010 and 15. 2012 was improving coordination, the result of improving coordination with EU partners. In particular, a new thinking of ODA coming from Northern Europe. On the 12th of September 2012, the EU Commission published a communication for the first time entitled "The Roots of Democracy and Sustainable Development, the Engagement of Europe with Civil Society in Foreign Relations." This has forced us to change our thinking about ODA. And an even stronger shift happened in 2015 with the adoption of the SDGs, of course, of which number 17 has been mentioned before. And I would say in our case, specifically, the December Paris Agreement on climate change, for which NGOs played such a huge role in advance of the governmental meeting to force governments in each of the countries to be able to get to a change of mind and a more proactive position. Since 2017, therefore, France has committed to increase its ODA channel through civil society organizations. To address a share that remains too low compared to the average of OECD DAC members, the average in the OECD is rather around 15% in 2017, our Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs decided in 2018 to double the funds transiting through CSOs from 2017 to 2022. And actually, that commitment has just recently been put into law, so we are bound by law in the July 2021 Law on Inclusive Development and the Fight Against Global Inequalities. As a consequence, between 2017 and 20, aid allocated to CSOs has increased already from 310 million euros to 532 million, which goes from 5.3 to 6.64 of our total bilateral ODA. This, again, is still low compared to a lot of the countries that were mentioned before. So you see where we're coming from and why the logic might be somehow different. What is interesting, and I noticed some of the presentations we made before, 63% of our ODA to CSOs goes to French organizations, which means that actually nearly 40% goes to foreign CSOs, which we have also helped training to apply more, to help them to be able to apply to the French standards of tenders, such as linguistic help, eligibility technicalities. How do you provide financial statements from your country when it is France that is requesting it, and how do you make the standardization, things like that. And it is interesting to note that in general, the orientation of the projects that we finance through CSOs is generally on par, similar to the main priorities that were developed for our general ODA. For instance, it lists around 15% for agriculture and food security, 10% for education and youth, and 9% for environment and climate change at this stage. Why CSOs, you may ask? And on this part, I won't maybe go too much into depth with whatever I've planned, because a lot of my reflections are similar to what I've heard from Australia and Japan. But the main first point that I want to support is the necessity to apply a more partnership approach to development cooperation that is consistent with SDG 17, because we consider that CSOs can help us better define our strategy for ODA ex ante, before you decide where am I going to put my money, to decide which policies I am better at, that I can be more proactive and I can bring a better contribution to the world, on which one do we estimate that the recipients have more need, on which ones can we work together with our European partners and other partners to decide, well, you're already very active in that field or in that village. Maybe I need instead to go to the next one. In this regard, CSOs bring a neutral, non-political vision that can provide either a waking call or serve as a whistleblower. For instance, 7% of projects that we funded in 2020 through CSOs now concern gender equality, which didn't used to be the case. And second, that is before and after, CSOs help us better assess and evaluate the added value and efficiency of ODA, which I believe is a very strong imperative in the democratic society towards taxpayers. We need to be able to justify to taxpayers, why is it that we are spending money and how is it really efficient? In this regard, the 2021 law that I mentioned before just created an independent commission on the evaluation of our ODA, which is based at our audit court and will include representatives from TSOs. Like Japan and Australia, I believe this approach to be partnership we apply at all levels. Of course, within France, with the National Council for Development and International Solidarity, which gathers all of the CSOs together, which has actually regional basis as well, so as to help push that type of dialogue also at the regional level within all of the regions, because our regions in France have more and more role in terms of economic power, and therefore they are also going abroad, and we need to have that discussion at the local level. I'll give you just one example. We opened up in the public tenders law for France itself the possibility for regions, municipalities, or local governments to be giving 1% of the sum that they get from the money of tenders on a project to the same kind of project abroad. So if you're working on tender for transport, you may be able to be pushing and giving some of that help outside for transport. And of course, like I believe I heard Akira-san saying it, this partnership approach we follow as well inside the developing countries with the same level of dialogue between our embassies and the local representatives of the CSOs. And of course, we encourage the same approach within the multilateral system, because France and the US initially, probably with the Global Fund, or maybe Gavi was the first example of this, and then the Global Fund against AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, and then went on to UNITAID. We have maintained for the 20 past years a very important dimension, which is to give a seat at the board of governance of those big multilateral institutions to representatives of CSOs, either from developing countries or from the developed countries, which helps bring a different voice at the table than only maybe the sometimes more politicized versions that comes from government. And why is it on the last part to how can we capitalize on the specific know-how of CSOs? Here, I believe that my colleagues said a lot of it already. They can help mobilize new financing. Let's face it, a lot of private donors are more trusting in putting their money to Doctors Without Borders or Médecins du Monde than they would be maybe to giving it to the state, which they consider to be usually ineffective and spending too much money and maybe not accountable as much, which is interesting. It is interesting also that governmental CSOs are able to go to places that governmental officers, whether they are us, the French, or whether they are the partner country, are not able to go, especially in terms of civil crisis, civil war, or where we might not want for political reasons to go. I'm thinking of the DPRK as a good example, where we give all of our assistance only through humanitarian needs to CSOs. The CSOs can help better transfer competencies to the local civil society as well, because it is important that your project will never survive very long if you're only bringing it from Paris and you put it on the tarmac and you leave it there. You need to train people on the ground, and for that to happen, it is a lot better if it happens between CSOs that know their intricate limits, possibilities, constraints, financial difficulties, human resources, whatever, that better than we do. They have better flexibility in the humanitarian crisis. And like Australia, I believe we still have a devoted office in our ministry for quick response and crisis management. However, in many cases, we find that CSOs are the best at quick first response. They are the first to intervene. They are much more flexible than we are. And they are also essential to ensure continuity after the first emergency reaction between emergency going into humanitarian aid, which is this continuum that always tends to be neglected and needs to be looked at. And maybe one point I haven't heard in the previous example, so I want to delve a bit into it, which I believe is very important, is the important role in education and development cooperation that the CSOs can bring, which is a democratic imperative to convince taxpayers, of course, but also the general public of why is it that it is legitimate to concentrate some of your public resources to ODA. It is also important to get more students, more young people interested in those types of careers and to help the recruitment in the future of the CSOs, including, by the way, in a specific example in my country, in offering new career prospects for young leaders who are coming out of the immigration waves, who might think that their perspectives for work are very limited at home, but who find a new sense of giving, of going out, of working, on using their own linguistic competences that maybe the more ancient people or the people whose families have lived for a longer time in France don't necessarily have. They can bring a different way, and they find career prospects into those situations. I'll give you one example. In 2020, when COVID was making international travel very difficult and it was very difficult to launch new projects for international aid, the MOFA in France launched a new tender for small education projects. Those are less than 4,000 euros. So 4,000 euros would be 100,000 NTs, I believe. So it's not big. But this is for international solidarity education within France. The eligibility of such projects is studied at the regional level in a multi-actor format again. It includes education bureaus, it includes citizen associations. It is about educating the youth to attract them to such new projects and careers. Just this year, there are 148 projects that were selected for a total of 500,000 euros. I'll give you just one example, which is very telling. It's an online exchange between school dropouts in Perpignan, in the south of France, and Morocco. School dropouts who might feel that they don't have a future to be looking forward, but they are learning about what is international solidarity. And they're learning about how they both look at such issues that you consider in your own national pathos as being immutable, and you don't consider that people can have different thinkings, such as history, human rights, religion, the environment, culture, education. You bring them to talk together, and that creates vocations in the end to work. One of the questions that the foundation asked us when we came here was, what recommendations would we have for Taiwan ODAs? I hope that from things that I have broached upon, and I need to be quick because I only have 30 seconds left, you can take into account the point that I just made about teaching, build legitimacy for ODA inside Taiwan. I hope that you can think about the importance of governance of ODA and how you need this has been amply exemplified by our previous speakers about bringing the voice of CSOs at the table at the moment when you define what the country's priorities should be. You should remember also to adapt. That is me as well, and I want to do that. There we go. This has been a tradition in this panel. I hope you remember to adapt a lot of the ODA grant processes to CSOs, because let's face it, such a strong organization like Médecins du Monde has a very good and ample experience at applying to such tenders, but most of the smaller ones wouldn't know necessarily all of the complicated processes. You need sometimes single platforms, one online format where you can find all of the information, all of the documents that you need that you can easily build. In 2020, the French MOFA edited a guide about public grants for international solidarities, which lists the variety of all of the types of tools available, because it's sometimes there are so many different branches that you get lost in. Where can I go to find money, whether at the French or at the European level, in our case? And maybe as a final point, please make use of Taiwan's strength. You have a specific insular economy, you have a tropical agriculture. We hear a lot about that by MOFA and a lot of things they do. I believe one thing that that Taiwan could build more upon is all of the values and democracy that you have to teach. I had a political delegation recently enough coming here to Taiwan that was very impressed by the way that democracy is going bottom up with all of civic tech, and how the civil society is pushing their government to democratize and open, instead of the very more old school regulation, top to bottom type of culture that we have in Europe. This is the types of expertise, such as how do you use technology to control your elected officials, things on which you have an experience that you can bring to the rest of the world, including to France, by the way. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur. I love especially, of course, his last comment was directly related to my work. So, of course, I appreciate that especially. And now, if hopefully Dr. Hachez has been able to hear us the whole time, has he? Has he been able to hear us?
Yes, I've
Are we able
been.
to hear him?
Can you hear me?
Yes, good. I can hear you fine. And there you are.
Good afternoon.
Have you been able to hear us so far?
Yes, I've heard you very well. Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Very difficult for me to be of any interest after the three speakers, my Australian, my Japanese, and my French colleagues, as it was so interesting, so passionate, and I will avoid to repeat everything what was said, and not only what was said at the very beginning by our Japanese colleagues about the type of rules. The Australian one, the type of rules you have to give trust to civil society organization and entrust them with the management of some of your monies, or public taxpayers' money, with all the consequences it could have. So Let me try nevertheless to get the attention of the audience. First of all, if I may introduce myself, my name is Daniel Hachez. I'm not a doctor. I'm a Minister Counselor, Head of Cooperation for various numbers of countries of South and Southeast and East Asia for the European Union. I'm based in Bangkok. I'm glad to be with you this afternoon. I feel very honored. I heard you before the break, before the coffee break, I heard you talking a lot about, I don't speak Chinese, but I heard NGOs all the time. Well, it was a surprise to me because the topic of the day is about civil society organizations and the relationship with the government. So very interesting. I'm grateful to Mr. Delvallee to have made some type of difference between NGOs and CSOs. Civil society organizations, non-state, non-for-profit organizations, but they do not only include NGOs, but also community-based organizations. So thanks to him. And sometimes even in certain countries, when we talk about CSOs, they are not NGOs, they are sometimes government organizations. The only way legally speaking for them to be active as civil society. And in some countries, these civil society organizations have to be private companies, commercial companies, if they want to exist, because there is no other legal way for them to exist as a legal entity otherwise. Now, I'm even more interested and glad to be here with you this afternoon that myself, for the 9 years I spent in Brussels between two postings, I was on the board of various civil society organizations. So I've been on the other sides of the discussion today with working with social service providers to homeless people and dealing with advocacy as well, because civil society organizations have these two hats, delivering certain services to the society and at the same time being active in advocacy. Now, talking about us, the European Union, and what we do and what are trends and models, how our work has been affected by the COVID pandemic, what are the efforts we make promoting civil society, and if any recommendations for the few minutes since still left. First of all, for us, the European Union, and thank you, you can go to the next slide, sorry. We have our Commissioner for International Partnerships, Mrs. Jurpilainen, former Finnish Minister of Finance. She's our Commissioner, if you want, the Minister, the member of the European government in charge of this development aid, but also furthermore partnerships. And in the mission letter that she got, she was requested to have a dedicated focus on supporting civil society around the world. And so what it means is because it said in the letter, these civil society organizations often lead the way on sustainable development, which means not only that they are examples, but that we all should wisely listen to them, to their expertise, practice what they have to tell us, in not a top-down approach, but in a bottom-up approach. So therefore, we should ensure that they have a greater role when we are going to have our development programs and assistance. As you know, the mandate of our European government is a geopolitical one. It's a geopolitical European Union Commission fighting and aiming at an open strategic independence in full respect of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. All these concepts that we know we practice every day, but as you know, that are decreasing in the world years after years, unfortunately. Today, as we talk about that, I will talk about not about humanitarian assistance. It is something different. We have the Sendai framework that is there to associate civil society organizations with donors as humanitarian actors together. I will put it aside and maybe only talk about the development aid. And when I talk about development aid, I have to remind, and I'm sorry for this 30 seconds commercial break, that the European Union, meaning the 27 member states, with their institution at the European level also. The 27 EU member states all together spend every year half of the official development assistance, which, if I was to translate it in your currency in Taipei, would be around $1,800 billion per year. So just to tell you, and this is thanks to the VAT, that the consumer tax that our citizens are paying each and every year, that is feeding the European budget. So, as was said by Mr. Delvallee, and thank you for that, he was mentioning this communication, this European communication on the roots of democracy and sustainable development and Europe's engagement with civil society in external relations. We consider civil societies as legitimate actors of governance in their own rights and implementers of development policy. And as you know, every country, rich or less developed, benefits from a vibrant or less vibrant civil society, grassroots, community-based organizations. They have clear advantages. By working with civil society, we are closer to populations. We can have a fast delivery of results, and they are able to impact hard to reach communities, as was just said a few minutes ago. So they're also able to build trusts, and they're allowed to have participatory dialogue with communities, and sometimes even better than local authorities can have. So our EU requirement is to align our external actions with civil society with the general international partnership and cooperation program. Next slide, please. So if I just talk very quickly about what we have done, as I said, the topic, strengths, models that we have, the efforts we made. Very briefly about that. In the last 7 years, we have spent 2 billion euros only on cooperation with civil society and local authorities in the thematics programs that we had, that allowed us to finance 1,400 projects all over the world. I'll spare you, but it's just to tell you that it has been done, and it has allowed to have this policy forum on development with civil society all over the world. It's also something that is very much at the heart of this Forum for Peace, World Forum for Peace, that has been organized by the French President, Mr. Macron, already for 2 years now, if I'm not wrong. And it's all these framework partnership agreements with networks of civil society, so we can dialogue from them, learn from them in everything we do. And these framework partnership agreements are in particular very useful in the field of humanitarian aid, but as I told you, I'm not going to talk about humanitarian aid. This is only one small part. I would say this is the tip of the iceberg, because when I talk about these 2 billion euros over the last 7 years, it's only what is concentrated on civil society to build the capacities, to facilitate their work with local authorities, so that at the local level, the grassroots population is listened at, taken into account in defining the needs and the work that has to be done at the local level. Because, and I said tip of the iceberg, because in fact we work with civil society organization in so many other areas than these specific ones. It can be to support health programs of health institutions in African countries, to protected areas. When you have civil society organizations that are in public-private partnership with the government in certain countries to manage protected areas, then we are with them to finance them for this purpose. So we work with them in many instances, as I said, on many topics, of course, gender equality, climate change, as I just mentioned, youth, irregular migration, indispensable. I'm not going to go into these details, but that's a very hot topic for the EU, as you know. Forced displacement that affects 200 million people around the world, internally displaced people, and the crisis and fragility, especially with all these failed states that are numerous, unfortunately, in this world. So next slide, please. So just to show you, but I'm not going to spend time, the way we are working now with our new regulation for the next 7 years, we have 3 ways of having our development programs: geographic ones by region, thematics, and in there you find a thematic program for civil society and organizations, where we are going to spend almost the same amount as we did over the last 7 years. I mentioned these 2 billion euros over the 7 years. And then we have rapid response mechanism that's also very useful when sometimes we work with civil society organization to diffuse conflicts and have people coming to the table to discuss and solve peacefully their problems. And then once again, humanitarian, as I said, but it's out of the scope, but to make the link between humanitarian work with future development one. It's the humanitarian development nexus. So next slide, please. Just 1 second, and then I delete it just to show you the budget we have for the next 7 years at the European Commission level, thanks to the generosity of our European taxpayers. It's around 80 billion euros over the next 7 years. And as I said, it appears to be 1.3 billion euros, especially for civil society organizations. If you had human rights and democracy, you double that amount, because of course human rights and democracy is work that we do with civil society organization, as you can imagine. Next slide, please. Now, when we talk about the efforts that we do, of course, when we talk about this budget, it's to do what? It's of course to contributing to an enabling environment for civil society. Civil society, if you allow me, and maybe I express a personal opinion, but maybe you will agree with me, civil society is not there to replace elected parliaments, elected governments. It's not a substitute to voting of people, but civil society contributes to the well-functioning and the sane functioning of democracies. It contributes to debates. It allows our populations, their populations, it allows also the leaders to take informed, debated decisions so that they can take the better as possible decisions. So to have civil society working in an enabling environment so that they can contribute to that is really a political objective we have. Of course, we want them to be much more included in the dialogues that we have on this development policies, on this partnership we build with third countries, and in the domestic policies and also policy dialogues between us, the European Union, our member states, and the countries we are in partnership with. And then, of course, we want with this tool, with these 1.3 billion euros over the next 7 years, and if you had human right democracy, the same topic, then we want to build their capacity so that they are credible, that we help them to become self-financed, because we don't have any vocation to finance them endlessly, so that they can partner with international civil society organizations, and to make them accountable to the grassroots population for whatever they say. Next slide, please. So our areas of engagements, various ones, I mentioned already gender empowerment, gender equality, which is a must in our world, and so much work to be done. But you see the area of engagement, this is how we are going to spend the 80 billion euros over the next 7 years in development aid as European Union. Of course, as I said, this is only a minor part. You have everything that comes from the EU member states, which is much more than the 80 billion I'm referring to, because as I said, EU member states all together with the EU are funding half of the official development assistance. So you see, we will have a request on whatever we'll do to have gender equality as a focus of at least 85% of our actions. 30% of our actions will need to be related to climate, the climate change, mitigation, fighting against it, adaptation, 10% at least for migration. I talked about migration as a hot topic in EU. And of course, also, as I said, to strengthen the CSO's capacity to address the local needs, and of course, our new EU geopolitical priorities. Next slide, please. I think we can almost pass this one because it's in the slides, you will have it. These are, in fact, for this geopolitical commission, a stronger Europe in the world, what we aim at, the 5 pillars, where we have the possibility to engage with civil society, including youth and women organizations, some of them more than some others. As I said, climate change, and but these are the SDGs, basically. Next slide, please. So how we do it, the way we have done, as we have a Europe team approach, thanks to our member states, wherever they are present. As we have this Team Europe approach, we have drafted, after reflection, roadmap in 110 countries where we are active, with all our member states, to say, what do we want to do to support civil society organization in that specific country? What are the actions we are, all of us, doing? How can we complement each other's work, etc., etc.? So something that is in a Team Europe approach to be even more efficient. EU member states embassies, European Union delegation all together. This is our current model. It can be for electoral monitoring, as I said, for climate change. It can be interfaith dialogue in Southeast Asia, for example. It can be gender-based violence, also in Asia, but elsewhere in the world, for consultations, online dialogues, and of course, calls for proposals, where we give, by the way, we are allowed to give grants to specific projects that are aligned with our priorities. Next slide, please. And this will be almost the last one. So this country roadmap is a strategic tool for us. As I said, we can pass to the next one because I'm going to repeat myself, otherwise I won't want to bother you. We can go to the next one, which is to say thank you, but just before that, as it was touched upon, next slide, please, with my thank you. Nevertheless, one more point, the impact of COVID. Yes, it was touched upon earlier. COVID has had an obvious impact on the civil society actions. There have been meeting and travel restrictions that have delayed operations. Some activities, such as exchange of challenges, best practice, reaching out to vulnerable groups, study visit, etc., are difficult to move online. However, it has been a threat. It has diminished what we were capable to do. But as my French colleague told, it has also given rise to opportunities, like he explained with education and Perpignan city. Okay, it is not helpful for us, but we have been in position to pass some support through civil society organization to fight against COVID, by giving them the tools, the means, whether to distribute products like antiseptic gels in many places, but also for them to use them as a tool to raise awareness of the population about the do's and the don'ts in COVID time. So it has had an impact, but it has given us new opportunities. In conclusion, because you were requesting what kind of policy recommendations. In conclusion, well, for us, the model we have, it's not a new one at the European level, and thanks to our 27 EU member states, country roadmaps to work together, as I said, and second of all, dialogue, capacity building of CSOs, good governance, rule of laws, and as well as was said, why not to get, even if they are not civil society organizations, why not to get our companies, profit-making companies, engaging in their corporate and social and environmental responsibility to do some work to support civil society organizations and development. Thank you very much to all of you.
Merci beaucoup. That was wonderful. And now we'll move right along to coming back to Taiwan to reflect and discuss on all these wonderful presentations. Ambassador Wu, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, up to hearing all the 4 presentations, we really very envy, not only for your sizable budget allocated on civil society organization, also on the complete mechanism between the CSO and the government for coordination and cooperation. I want to briefly give you the story of Taiwan. Although everybody knows that Taiwan is equipped with a very vibrant civil society, however, the momentum of our civil society is unevenly distributed. I want to give you a figure that 80% of the donation from the civil society goes to 8% of civil society organization. With that, so our seminar is to focus on asking more resources from the government, how to establish mechanism between our civil society and the government. And we have learned a lot from you, because you not only provide us with a very healthy and well-connected mechanism and also evaluation system. Now, I want to give you a statement of our civil society organizations. Number one is that for the shy budget, because only very limited budget come from the government, because our government has to spend the resources concentrate to our 10 airline nations. Secondly, we believe that